The moment I found out, I thought I was going to collapse right there in front of everyone. It was at my daughter Olivia's graduation, a day that was supposed to be full of joy and celebration. I had spent the whole morning planning the perfect dinner, carefully setting the table with the good china, lighting the candles, and making sure everything was perfect for my family. But nothing prepared me for what came next. As we gathered around the table after the ceremony, my husband, Tom, pulled me aside. His words were calm, but the pain in them hit me like a freight train. "I'm leaving you, Emma," he said. "I've decided to start a new life." It felt like the ground beneath me had just crumbled away. There, in front of our daughter and our friends, my husband told me he was leaving me after all these years, just like that. The confusion in my mind was overwhelming. How could this be happening? Everything had been fine, hadn't it? I watched him speak, his eyes steady but cold, and I could hardly believe the words that were coming out of his mouth. I didn't know how to react, how to handle this crushing blow. I wanted to scream, to cry, to ask him why, but I didn't. I just stood there, frozen in shock, trying to process what was happening. I saw Olivia across the room, her bright face filled with excitement about her graduation. She had no idea what was unfolding between her father and me. Tom didn't seem to care. There was no emotion in his voice, no remorse in his eyes. It was as if this decision had been made long ago, and he was just delivering the news as if it was a simple task to be checked off. I couldn't understand how he could be so calm, so detached. I tried to stay composed, to keep the facade for Olivia's sake. After all, it was supposed to be her day, not ours. But as the evening wore on, the tension between Tom and me grew unbearable. It was clear now, there was no going back. He was determined to leave, to start fresh, and I was left to pick up the pieces. I could feel my world spinning out of control, but I couldn't let him see the devastation in my eyes. I turned away from him, keeping my emotions hidden behind a tight smile. The truth was, I didn't know what to do next. My heart was shattered, but I knew that I couldn't let him see that. I had to think clearly, make a decision, take control. So, I did what I had to do. I walked calmly to the bedroom, took a deep breath, and grabbed the envelope I had been holding onto for months. Inside it was the document that would change everything. It was the divorce papers, signed and ready. I didn't need to say a word. When I walked back into the room, Tom was packing his bags, not even looking at me. His back was turned, and that's when I handed him the envelope. "Here," I said softly. "You'll need this for your new life." He turned to me, his eyes wide with surprise, and for a moment, I thought I saw something in them. Regret, maybe? But no, it was gone in an instant. He just looked at me, then at the envelope, and without another word, he took it. As he walked out the door, I could feel the weight of the decision settling in my chest. My world had just shifted, and I was left with nothing but the quiet echo of his footsteps fading away. Olivia didn't understand. How could she? But I knew in that moment that my life was about to change forever. And I was ready for it. The next few days were a blur. My mind couldn't catch up with my emotions. I kept replaying the conversation over and over in my head, trying to understand what had gone wrong. How had we gotten here? How had I not seen this coming? But there was no clear answer, just a growing emptiness that gnawed at me. Tom was gone. He had packed up his things and left, just like that. No goodbyes, no apologies, just a simple declaration that shattered everything. Olivia didn't know. I couldn't bring myself to tell her the truth yet. She was so excited about her future, her graduation, and I didn't want to destroy that joy for her. But how could I hide it forever? The house felt so quiet now. It was strange how the absence of one person could change everything. The halls that once echoed with Tom's footsteps were now eerily silent. I kept expecting to hear the sound of the door opening, his voice calling my name, asking about dinner or the TV remote. But that never came. I would stand in the kitchen, staring at the empty chairs at the table, imagining him sitting there, but it was all just a memory now. Olivia noticed. She had been distant at first, probably too caught up in her own world to see the change. But after a couple of days, she started asking questions. Small ones at first, like why Tom hadn't called or why he wasn't coming home for dinner. I tried to avoid the subject, giving vague answers, hoping she wouldn't push too hard. But Olivia wasn't stupid. She could tell something was off. "Mom, where's Dad?" she asked one evening, her voice trembling slightly as she sat across from me at the dinner table. I could see the concern in her eyes. She was trying to make sense of it all, just like I had been. I didn't know what to say. How could I explain it to her? How could I tell her that the man she had looked up to her whole life had just walked out without a second thought? He's not coming back, Olivia," I said, my voice thick with emotion. The words were harder to say than I had imagined. Olivia's face fell, her lips trembling as she tried to process what I had just told her. "But why? What happened?" I sighed, feeling the weight of everything crashing down on me. "I don't know," I whispered. "I don't know, honey." And that was the truth. I didn't know. I had no answers for her, no explanations. All I had were the broken pieces of a life I thought I understood. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt lost. How had I missed the signs? How had I allowed myself to believe that everything was fine when clearly it wasn't? Tom had been distant for months, maybe even longer. But I had chalked it up to stress, to the demands of his job, to the routine of life. I had believed him when he said everything was fine. But now I saw the cracks, the subtle changes in his behavior that I had overlooked. He hadn't just made this decision on a whim. No, it had been building for a long time. I should have known. I should have seen it. But the truth is, I had been too comfortable in my own world to notice. Olivia stood up, wiping away a tear that had slipped down her cheek. She didn't say anything more, but I could see the pain in her eyes. She had always been the strong one, always trying to hold things together. But now, I could see that she was breaking too. The next few days were filled with an awkward silence. I tried to go about my normal routine, keeping busy with work, with the house, with whatever else I could think of to keep my mind occupied. But nothing felt normal. Every room in the house felt emptier without Tom. His absence was a constant reminder of everything I had lost. I couldn't bring myself to talk to him, not after everything that had happened. What was there to say? He had made his choice. He had left. And I was left behind alone. But despite everything, I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let this destroy me. I wasn't going to fall apart. I wasn't going to let Tom's decision define who I was. I had spent years taking care of everyone else, putting their needs before mine, but now it was time for me to take care of myself. I had to. Olivia needed me. And deep down, I knew I could get through this. I had to. I looked at the empty space in the living room where Tom's things used to be. I hadn't touched anything yet. It felt too soon, too painful. But soon, I knew I would have to face it. I would have to face the reality of what had happened. And when I did, I would be ready. Because I had a new life to build now. And I wasn't going to let him take that away from me. The silence in the house had become unbearable. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was always missing. It was like I had lost a piece of myself, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't find it again. Olivia, despite her own pain, had been the one to try and keep things together. She would walk around the house, trying to smile, but I could see the hurt in her eyes. She was worried about me, and I could feel the weight of that every time I looked at her. But she wasn't the only one I had to worry about. I had to figure out what to do next, how to rebuild the pieces of my life that Tom had shattered so easily. Tom had left. The house felt emptier than ever before. His absence echoed in every corner, in every room where memories of our life together once lived. The silence was deafening, and I couldn't escape it. I had always been the one to take care of things, to keep everything in order, but now, there was no order. I was lost in this quiet, empty house, and I couldn't tell if it was because of Tom or because of what had happened to me. I spent the first few days just going through the motions. I didn't talk to anyone. I didn't call friends, and I didn't respond to messages. The world outside had continued, but inside, it felt like everything had stopped. Olivia, I knew, was trying to keep some normalcy for herself. She had her own life, her own friends, and I could tell she was trying to distract herself from the chaos at home. She would come home late, sometimes with a few friends, and we would have dinner together. But even those moments felt forced. I could feel the unspoken tension between us. She didn't know how to deal with her father leaving, and neither did I. But what struck me the most was how calm I felt. It was like I had become numb to everything. I didn't feel angry, I didn't feel sad. I just felt nothing. Maybe it was because I had already gone through the worst of it when I first heard the words, but now, all I had left was this strange emptiness. The days blurred together. I couldn't remember when exactly it happened, but eventually, I stopped caring about trying to make everything work. I stopped cleaning the house the way I used to, stopped cooking the meals I would make for Tom, stopped setting the table like I always had. I couldn't bring myself to do those things anymore. They felt like a lie. They felt like things I used to do for a man who no longer cared. Olivia, on the other hand, had started staying at her friends' houses more often. I didn't blame her. She had to get away. She had to live her life, and I wasn't going to stop her. I wasn't going to be the reason she stayed in this sad, empty house. I wasn't going to be the reason she lost herself too. So I let her go. But the emptiness, that ache that had started in the pit of my stomach, grew deeper. It was like I was standing still while the world around me moved on. Time was slipping away, and I didn't know what to do with it. It was on one of those long, lonely nights, when the house was completely still, that I realized something. I couldn't stay in this place forever. I couldn't let this silence, this loneliness, consume me. It was time for me to make a change. I had spent so many years trying to keep everything together, trying to be the perfect wife, the perfect mother. But now, there was no one left to please. There was no one left to take care of except myself. I had to figure out what I wanted, what I needed, and what I deserved. I had to start over, not just for Olivia, but for myself. The next day, I made the first move. I picked up the phone and called a real estate agent. I had already made up my mind. The house, the life I had shared with Tom, it was all gone now. I had to let it go. And as soon as I hung up the phone, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. It was a small step, but it was a step forward. It was the first time I felt like I was in control of my life again. It wasn't going to be easy, and I knew that. There would be moments when I would want to give up, moments when I would want to go back to the way things were. But I couldn't. I had to keep moving forward. For Olivia. For myself. For the future that was waiting for me. The next few days, I started packing up the house. It felt like the hardest thing I had ever done. But every box I packed, every room I cleared out, I felt lighter. I felt like I was shedding the weight of the past, the weight of the man who had left me behind. And with each step, I was getting closer to the life I wanted to build. The house would be sold, but I wasn't going to leave empty-handed. I was going to take the memories, the lessons, and the strength I had gained through it all. And no matter what came next, I was going to make sure I didn't lose myself again. The days turned into weeks, and I felt myself slowly adjusting to this new reality. At first, it felt like I was moving through a fog, barely able to see the way forward. Every day was filled with reminders of what had been lost, of the life I had thought was solid, the family I had tried to hold together. But as time passed, I began to feel something else creeping in, a sense of freedom. It wasn't easy, but it was real. I started making decisions for myself, small ones at first, but they gave me the courage to keep going. The house sold quicker than I expected. The moment I signed the final papers, it felt like I had just closed a chapter of my life. I stood outside, watching the new owners walk into the house, and for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. I didn't have to keep pretending. I didn't have to stay in that house, drowning in memories of Tom and all that we had once been. I was free. But that wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. I moved into a small apartment downtown, a place of my own. It was nothing grand, just enough to start fresh. I decorated it slowly, picking out new furniture, things that I chose because I liked them, not because they were part of a shared life. I didn't want to hold on to anything that reminded me of the past, of Tom, of the life I had thought I would have forever. Olivia was still adjusting too, but she was starting to find her way. She had always been strong, even when I hadn't been able to see it. She spent more time with me now, coming over after work, talking about her day. We didn't talk much about Tom, and I was okay with that. She had her own pain to deal with, and I didn't want to burden her with mine. One afternoon, I was sitting on my couch, flipping through a photo album I had found while unpacking. The pictures were of Olivia's childhood, of moments we had shared as a family. I paused on one photo in particular, Olivia, just a toddler, sitting on Tom's lap, her small hands holding his. She looked so happy, so innocent. I had almost forgotten what that felt like, the kind of happiness that was so pure, so effortless. I closed the album and set it down. That was the past, and it wasn't mine anymore. As I started to settle into this new life, I realized that I had spent so much of my energy trying to keep everything intact, trying to make everything work for everyone else. I had neglected myself in the process. But no more. It was time for me to be selfish. For the first time in years, it was time for me to live for me. I signed up for a yoga class, something I had always wanted to try. The first day was hard. My body ached in places I didn't even know existed, but it felt good too. It felt like I was waking up after a long sleep, stretching muscles that had been neglected for too long. The instructor was kind, patient, and encouraged me every step of the way. It wasn't just about the physical movement. It was about reconnecting with myself, with the woman I had once been before I had put everyone else's needs first. As I continued going to the classes, I found myself thinking less about Tom and the betrayal, less about the life I had lost. I started to focus on what I wanted. I began to make plans for the future, small, tentative plans, but they were mine, and that was enough for me. Olivia and I had dinner together a few weeks after I moved into the apartment. She looked at me differently now, with a sort of respect that had been missing before. She could see the change in me, just as I could see it in her. We were both finding our way, and though it wasn't easy, it felt like we were starting to rebuild. "Mom," she said one evening, as we sat together at the kitchen table, "I'm proud of you." I looked at her, surprised. "What do you mean?" I asked, not sure what she was talking about. I see how strong you're being. How you're making this work, even when it's hard. You're starting over, and that's not easy." Her words hit me in a way I didn't expect. I realized then that my strength had always been in quietly carrying the weight of everything, but now, I was learning to share that weight, to let others see the strength I had inside. It wasn't about pretending to be okay anymore. It was about being okay, even when I wasn't. It was about accepting that I had the power to choose what came next. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel afraid. I wasn't afraid of being alone, of starting over, of what the future might hold. Because I knew that I had already survived the hardest part. The rest I could handle. I was done being the woman who stayed behind, the one who kept the family together. Now, I was the woman who was moving forward, the woman who was learning to live for herself. And that was all that mattered. The phone call with the lawyer had been the first step, the signing of the papers the next. The sale of the house had been a clean break, but this was the final piece of the puzzle. I was free, and I was going to take that freedom and make something beautiful out of it. Weeks passed, and with each day that went by, I found myself feeling a little more like the person I used to be. It wasn't an instant change, not by any means. But there was something about living alone, in a space that was entirely mine, that gave me a sense of clarity I hadn't had in years. I didn't have to answer to anyone anymore. I didn't have to keep up the facade of a perfect family life. I could just be. And that was enough. I spent more time with Olivia, taking long walks in the park, or just sitting together at the kitchen table, talking about everything and nothing. It was in those moments that I realized how much I had neglected myself over the years. My whole identity had been tied to being Tom's wife, to being Olivia's mother. But now, for the first time, I was learning to just be Emma. It was a strange feeling, but also incredibly freeing. One afternoon, Olivia invited me to lunch at a small cafe downtown. It was one of those sunny days that felt like the first hint of spring after a long, cold winter. As we sat outside, sipping our iced teas, Olivia looked at me with a smile that made her look so much like her younger self. "Mom," she said, her voice soft, "I've been thinking about what you said. About starting over. I think I need to do that too." I was surprised, but I could see the sincerity in her eyes. She had always been so focused on school, on her future, but now she seemed like she was finally ready to take a step back and figure out what she really wanted. "What do you mean?" I asked, trying to read her face. She paused for a moment, gathering her thoughts. "I've been chasing things, you know? Always trying to meet expectations, make everyone proud. But I never really stopped to ask myself what I want." Her words hit me harder than I expected. I knew exactly what she meant. It had taken me years to come to that realization, and now here she was, figuring it out for herself. We talked about it for a while, about how we both felt like we had been living for others, and how we were ready to start living for ourselves. It was like we were both finding our way, together. It wasn't easy, but it was happening. After that lunch, I found myself thinking more and more about what I wanted. I started looking into different hobbies, things I had always been curious about but never had the time for. I took up painting. I had never thought of myself as an artist, but there was something so therapeutic about it. I wasn't trying to create masterpieces, I was just trying to express what was inside me, to let it out. The first few paintings were rough, but that didn't matter. It wasn't about the final product, it was about the process. Slowly but surely, I began to rediscover pieces of myself I had forgotten. I also started taking more care of my health. I joined a local gym and began working with a trainer, someone who would help me build strength. Not just physically, but mentally as well. It was hard, at first. I wasn't in my 20s anymore, and my body didn't bounce back like it used to. But I was determined. For the first time in years, I was doing something for me. I didn't have to do it for anyone else, and that made all the difference. I made new friends too, people who weren't connected to Tom or our old life. They didn't know about the betrayal, the heartache, the empty house. They just knew me, Emma. And that was all that mattered. It felt strange at first, being around people who didn't have any preconceived notions about who I was. But it was also refreshing. For the first time, I was seen for who I was, not who I had been. One evening, as I was getting ready to head out for dinner with one of my new friends, I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror. It wasn't just the way I looked that had changed, though that was part of it. It was the way I felt about myself. I didn't feel broken anymore. I didn't feel like I had to prove anything to anyone. I was just me. And for the first time in a long time, that felt enough. Olivia and I continued to grow closer, and I could see that she, too, was finding her own path. We didn't need Tom to define us anymore. We didn't need anyone but each other. There were still days when the loneliness crept in, when I would catch myself wishing things had turned out differently. But those moments were fleeting. The truth was, I was starting to like the life I was building for myself. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't easy, but it was mine. And that was more than I could have ever asked for. One night, as I sat in my apartment, looking out at the city lights, I thought about everything I had been through. The pain, the betrayal, the heartbreak. But I also thought about how far I had come. And for the first time, I didn't just see a woman who had been abandoned. I saw a woman who was strong, who was capable, who had a future to look forward to. It wasn't the future I had imagined, but it was mine, and I was ready for it. I took a deep breath and smiled, knowing that whatever came next, I would be okay. Months passed since I made the decision to let go, and the more time I spent on my own, the more I realized how much I had neglected to live for myself. I had spent so many years trying to maintain the illusion of a perfect life, a perfect family. But now, I was starting to build something new, something real. There were days when I still missed the life I had once known, but those moments were becoming fewer. I was learning to embrace this new chapter, even if it was not what I had imagined. I began to feel like I was reclaiming pieces of myself I had forgotten. One evening, I was sitting on the couch, sipping a glass of wine, when Olivia came home. She had been out with friends, but her eyes were tired, and she seemed distant. I could tell something was weighing on her. She sat down beside me, not saying anything at first, just staring ahead. "Mom," she said after a long silence, "I've been thinking a lot lately. About everything." I turned to face her, giving her my full attention. I had learned not to rush these moments, to give her space to say what she needed to say. "What's on your mind?" I asked gently. Olivia hesitated, then sighed. I don't know. I thought I had everything figured out. I was focused on school, on my future, on what everyone expected of me. But now, I feel lost." Her words hit me harder than I expected. I realized then that I wasn't the only one going through a transformation. Olivia, too, was finding her way. She had been so caught up in trying to live up to everyone's expectations that she had forgotten to ask herself what she truly wanted. "It's okay to feel that way," I said, my voice steady. "I felt the same way not too long ago. It's okay to not have all the answers. It's okay to take a step back and figure things out." Olivia looked at me, her expression softening. "But how do you do it, Mom? How do you just let go of everything and start over?" I smiled, thinking about how much I had learned in the past few months. "It's not easy," I said quietly. "But you have to start with yourself. You have to decide that you're worth it. That your happiness matters just as much as anyone else's." Olivia nodded slowly, her gaze shifting to the window as if contemplating my words. I knew it wouldn't be an easy journey for her, just as it hadn't been for me. But I also knew that this was a part of growing up, a part of learning to live for yourself. Later that evening, after Olivia had gone to bed, I found myself thinking about Tom. It had been months since he left, but sometimes his memory would still catch me off guard. It wasn't that I wanted him back, it was just that some days, the weight of everything would hit me all at once. I had given so much of myself to him, to the family, and now I was left picking up the pieces. I took a deep breath and let the thoughts pass. I couldn't keep dwelling on the past. I had spent too many years doing that already. It was time to focus on the present, on what I could control. The next day, I decided to take a small step forward. I had been thinking about taking a solo trip for a while, something I had never done before. I had always put my family's needs before my own, and now it was my turn. I looked up a few places online and booked a weekend getaway to a quiet cabin by a lake. It wasn't far, but it was just enough to give me a break, to get away from the noise of everyday life. When I told Olivia about it, she was surprised, but also supportive. "That sounds amazing, Mom," she said with a smile. "I think you deserve it." The weekend came, and I packed my bags, leaving behind the apartment and the city. It felt strange, stepping away from everything I had known. But as I drove to the cabin, I felt a sense of freedom wash over me. The further I went, the lighter I felt. It was as if I was leaving behind all the baggage, all the pain, and stepping into something new. When I arrived, the cabin was peaceful, surrounded by tall trees and the soft sounds of nature. I spent the first day just exploring, breathing in the fresh air, and letting go of the weight I had been carrying for so long. The next morning, I woke up early and sat on the porch with a cup of coffee, watching the sun rise over the lake. For the first time in months, I felt at peace. The world seemed so much smaller here, simpler, and I realized how much I had missed this sense of calm. I didn't have to be anything for anyone else. I could just be. The trip was a turning point for me. It gave me the time and space I needed to reflect, to realize that I was no longer defined by my past. I was someone new, someone stronger, and someone who was ready to embrace whatever came next. When I returned to the apartment, I felt different. I felt like I had shed a skin, like I was finally stepping into my own life. Olivia noticed the change too. "You seem different, Mom," she said one evening, her eyes bright. "Like you've really found yourself." I smiled and nodded. "I think I have." And for the first time in a long time, I truly believed it. The days that followed were a mix of quiet reflection and small, steady steps forward. I could feel the shift inside me, the sense that I was becoming someone new, someone who had learned to stand on her own, but it wasn't without its challenges. There were moments when the weight of the past threatened to pull me under again, but I had learned how to breathe through it, how to let the memories come and go without letting them define me. Olivia had been quieter lately, and I could sense the weight on her heart. She was still processing everything, and as much as I tried to shield her, I knew that she had to find her own way through it. One evening, we sat together at the kitchen table, and for the first time in a while, we just talked. There was no tension, no unsaid words hanging between us. It was as if the space had finally cleared, and we could just be mother and daughter again. She told me about her new job, how she was excited and nervous at the same time, and I could see the spark in her eyes that had been missing for so long. "Mom," she said, her voice soft but full of conviction, "I think I finally understand what you meant. About living for yourself, about being your own person." Her words hit me with the force of a revelation. I had always known that she was strong, that she had the same resilience I had, but hearing her say it out loud was different. She had come to the same place I had, and it filled me with a sense of pride I hadn't expected. It was then that I realized we weren't just healing individually. We were healing together. Our journey wasn't about forgetting what had happened, but about finding our way through it, side by side. It wasn't always easy, but it was real. As the weeks went by, I found myself more and more at peace with the choices I had made. I no longer dreaded the quiet moments, or felt the need to fill the emptiness with distractions. I learned to sit with myself, to truly appreciate the person I had become. The woman who had once feared being alone, who had spent so many years living for others, was now the woman who could walk through her days with her head held high, not because of anyone else's approval, but because she had finally learned to love herself. One morning, as I was walking through the park near my apartment, I stopped at a bench by the pond and sat down. The sun was just starting to rise, casting a soft, golden light across the water. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath, feeling the warmth of the day start to settle into my bones. It felt like a new beginning, not just for the world around me, but for me, too. I had spent so long wondering who I was without Tom, who I was without my role as his wife, as Olivia's mother. But now I knew that I was more than those roles. I was Emma. And that was enough. The silence that had once felt so heavy now felt comforting, like a blanket wrapping around me. It was my silence, my space, and it was exactly what I needed to hear myself, to understand myself. I didn't need to fill the space with anything. It was already full. I stood up, stretched my arms towards the sky, and smiled. I had come so far, and I was ready for whatever came next. I wasn't afraid anymore. I was ready to embrace the future, with all its uncertainty and promise. And the best part was, I was no longer afraid of being alone. Because for the first time in years, I was learning how to enjoy my own company, how to be content with just being me. Olivia came by later that day, and we sat together on the couch, talking about everything and nothing at all. It wasn't about the past anymore. It was about the now, and the future we were both building. And as I looked at her, I realized that while our paths were different, we were both moving forward, finding our own ways, and that was the most important thing. It wasn't easy. It wasn't perfect. But it was ours. And that was enough. It had been months since I made the decision to move forward, but there were still moments when I would catch myself looking back, wondering if I had done the right thing. The road ahead was still unfamiliar, and yet, with each passing day, I felt more certain that I was heading in the right direction. Olivia had settled into her own rhythm too. She was spending more time focusing on her career, and I could see the pride in her eyes when she talked about her work. She was growing, just like I was. The change in her wasn't as obvious as mine had been, but I could sense it. We were both learning to live for ourselves again, finding joy in the simple things, in moments that once seemed insignificant. One morning, after an early yoga class, I received a call from my old friend, Marianne. We had known each other for years, but life had gotten in the way, and we had lost touch. Hearing her voice again brought a rush of warmth. "Emma," she said, "I've been thinking about you. How are you really doing?" Her voice was filled with concern, and I could hear the genuine care behind it. I smiled, the weight of the past few months lifting off my shoulders just by hearing her ask. "I'm doing okay," I replied, my voice steady. "Better than okay, actually. I'm starting to feel like myself again." There was a pause on the other end of the line before Marianne spoke again. "I'm so glad to hear that. You deserve to be happy, Emma. You've always been there for everyone else, and now it's time for you." Her words stayed with me long after we hung up. It was a reminder that I hadn't just been taking care of others for years. I had been neglecting the most important person in my life, myself. Later that afternoon, I went for a walk in the park, the cool breeze brushing against my face as I moved along the path. I had always loved this park, the way the trees stretched high above, their leaves rustling softly in the wind. It had been a place of comfort for me during difficult times, and now, it felt like a place of renewal. As I walked, I noticed the way the sunlight filtered through the branches, casting shadows on the ground. It was as if the world around me had come alive, just like I was. I realized then that this was the first time in years that I was truly aware of my surroundings, that I wasn't just going through the motions. The world had become vibrant again, and I was seeing it with fresh eyes. I continued my walk, letting my thoughts drift. Life had changed in ways I hadn't expected, and while it hadn't been easy, I was starting to see that it had been necessary. I wasn't the same person I had been when Tom left, and I didn't want to be. I wanted to live for myself, to embrace the life I had, rather than mourn the one I had lost. It was a liberating feeling, knowing that I was finally free to be me, to make my own choices without worrying about what anyone else thought. When I returned to my apartment, Olivia was sitting on the couch, her phone in hand. She looked up when I entered, her face lighting up with a smile. "How was your walk, Mom?" she asked, setting her phone aside. "It was perfect," I said, sitting down next to her. "I'm starting to see things differently, Olivia. I'm starting to realize that it's okay to focus on me for a change." Olivia's eyes softened, and she reached over to squeeze my hand. "I'm proud of you, Mom," she said, her voice full of sincerity. "I know it hasn't been easy, but you're doing it. You're really doing it." I smiled at her, feeling a sense of pride swelling in my chest. "I've learned a lot," I said, my voice steady. "And I'm still learning. But I know one thing for sure. I'm going to keep moving forward. No matter what." The next few weeks were filled with small victories, moments where I caught glimpses of the person I was becoming. I took more time for myself, whether it was getting lost in a good book, spending a day painting, or just sitting outside and enjoying the sun. I learned that it was okay to take breaks, to rest, and to just be. It was a new rhythm, one that didn't rely on anyone else to define it. Olivia and I continued to grow closer, and I saw her becoming more confident, more sure of herself with each passing day. We talked more openly about our hopes, our dreams, and the futures we were both building. It felt good to know that we were both on this journey together, even if our paths were different. We didn't have to have all the answers, but we were figuring it out as we went. One evening, as we sat at the kitchen table, Olivia shared some exciting news. She had been offered a job opportunity in another city, a chance to grow in her career. I could see the excitement in her eyes, but I also noticed the uncertainty. "I don't know, Mom. It's a big move," she said. "But it feels like the right thing to do." I smiled, proud of the woman she had become. "You'll figure it out," I said. "And no matter what, I'm here for you. Always." She nodded, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thanks, Mom. That means the world to me." As I watched her walk away, I realized how much we had both changed, how far we had come. The past wasn't behind us, but it no longer had a hold on us either. We were moving forward, step by step, and that was all we could do. The weeks turned into months, and the more I adjusted to this new version of myself, the more I realized how much I had been holding back for years. Olivia's decision to move away was a turning point for both of us. It was the final piece of the puzzle. She was stepping into her future, and I was stepping into mine. It was a bittersweet feeling, watching her leave, but I knew it was the right thing for her. She needed to follow her own path, just as I had done. As for me, I had begun to understand something that I had forgotten for so long. I had value beyond my roles as a wife and a mother. I had my own dreams, my own desires, and it was time to focus on them. I started volunteering at a local shelter, something I had always wanted to do but never had the time for. It was rewarding in a way I had never imagined. The people I met there, the stories they shared, reminded me that there was so much more to life than the narrow world I had once confined myself to. I didn't have to be perfect, and I didn't have to have all the answers. I just had to be present, to show up for myself and for others. One evening, after a long day of volunteering, I sat on my balcony watching the sunset. The sky was painted in hues of pink and orange, and the cool evening air felt refreshing. I took a deep breath, letting the moment settle in. It wasn't the life I had planned, but it was mine. And that was enough. I thought back to the time when I had felt so lost, so unsure of who I was without Tom. The thought seemed almost foreign now. I was no longer that woman. I had rebuilt myself from the ground up, not in spite of the loss, but because of it. My sense of self had been forged in the fire of hardship, and now I was standing stronger than I ever thought possible. Olivia called me that night, and her voice was filled with excitement. "Mom, you won't believe what happened," she said. "I got the job I applied for. They offered me the position in New York." I could hear the joy in her voice, and for the first time in a long time, I felt completely at peace. She was following her dreams, just like I had started to follow mine. "I'm so proud of you, Olivia," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "I always knew you could do it," as she talked excitedly about her move and the new opportunities awaiting her. I realized how far we both had come. The journey had been long and difficult, but it had led us to this point, this moment of fulfillment and possibility. The life I had once known was behind me, but the life I was building now was more than I ever imagined it could be. It was not perfect, but it was mine. And it was beautiful. In the months that followed, I continued to grow. I enrolled in a writing course, something I had always wanted to pursue but had never made time for. Writing became a way for me to express my thoughts, my feelings, and my experiences. It was liberating, and with each assignment, I felt more connected to the person I was becoming. I wrote about the struggles I had faced, the heartache, and the healing, and it felt like I was shedding another layer of the past. I wasn't just writing about what happened, I was writing about who I had become because of it. Olivia visited often, and we would talk for hours about everything, about her new job, my writing, and how far we had come. We were no longer mother and daughter holding on to the past. We were two women moving forward, building lives that were independent but still intertwined. The bond we shared had deepened in ways I never could have imagined. One afternoon, Olivia came over with a box in hand. "I thought you might want these," she said, setting it down in front of me. I opened the box and found old photos, mementos from our family trips, and keepsakes from times long past. "I figured it was time to let go of some things," she said quietly. "But I wanted you to have these." I looked through the photos, remembering the good times, the ones that had come before everything fell apart. It wasn't easy, but I knew it was time to let go. "Thank you," I whispered, my fingers brushing over the photographs. It was another step forward, another moment of release. I didn't need to hold on to the past anymore. The future was waiting, and it was mine to shape. As I put the box of memories aside, I looked around my apartment, my sanctuary. It was small, but it was my space, and in it, I had found peace. For the first time in a long time, I was not afraid of the future. I was not afraid of being alone. I was not afraid of living for myself. I had finally learned that I was enough, just as I was. And as the days went by, I kept moving forward. One step at a time, one day at a time. And every step I took, I knew I was becoming the person I was always meant to be,